Carolyn Cromings, and welcome back to the Quit Getting Screwed construction podcast, where we talk about all the ways not to get screwed in the construction industry. And today we're talking about a big topic in the construction industry, safety and environmental issues. And so today with me, I have Terry Dussault with Yellowknife Safety. Good morning, Terry. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on the podcast. This is going to be really fun and exciting.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, you bet.
So you're in construction safety. So tell me some background, how you got here, how you got your own business. Tell me the story.
Okay. Well, it kind of started out way back. I started a company back when I was probably 19 or 20 years old and ran it for about 10 years and then sold that and then ended up kind of like accidentally getting into the environmental industry. And the first job I got in the environmental industry was with a company that was founded by John Wayne.
Really?
And yeah, a lot of people don't know that he was a kind of like an environmentalist at heart. And he sought a person to start this company, and they started building oil water separators for ships. And it evolved from there. And so I was at that company about 3 years, and then I left and ended up in the oil and gas industry and doing a lot of environmental work for big oil mainly. And
Gotcha.
It was like at that point that I got introduced to the safety side of things. And part of it was because the oil companies were starting to see a lot of trends with, safety, and they were starting to do a lot of tracking of metrics. And this is way back in the probably late 90s, early 2000s. So they were really ahead of the curve on it.
Uh-huh.
And then they started having a lot of their subcontractors go through different safety programs and things like that. And it kind of just went from there. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
So how did you start your own company doing the safety trainings and everything?
Well, the way it started was I went to work for a pretty big construction company, and I ended up being the safety director.
Gotcha.
And so, anytime you have a large company with 300 or 400 employees, there's a lot of things that go haywire, especially in the construction world. So it really tested my abilities, and we had to really ramp up and try and create a safety culture that really didn't exist. So, that's sort of how it started. And then when I, worked there and got involved with a lot of different aspects of the business, I eventually said, you know what, I think it's just time to make the jump. I was thinking about it for a long time, and the problem is the timing of it was just before COVID. So it's only been a few years. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, there was a lot more safety implemented with COVID though, too.
Yeah. So now the good thing is that it really all worked out, and it worked out because I had a lot of contacts, and I also, my reputation, I feel, kind of helped get me through. But there was a few months where it was pretty sticky, and I thought I was having some second thoughts for a bit,
Yes. So was everybody else who started a business in the middle of COVID?
Yeah.
Realize what they signed up for.
Yeah.
So tell me is your business in the business of giving people that safety culture, and how do you do that?
That is, it's a great question. I have a lot of clients of all different sizes, and some of them want to build a safety culture, but they really just don't know how, and they don't really know what it means. And then you have some other clients that they kind of have the culture already, and they might only need me on a limited basis. So if you want to build a safety culture, the trick to it really is to identify, where are your pain points first, and, and then kind of go from there. So like, for example, I had one client who started out and he said, look, we're just starting to see a lot of incidents happen, and it's really hitting me in the pocketbook, and I'm getting a little bit nervous about it. And I said, okay, well, what are you doing as far as, safety? And he said, well, really, we're not really doing anything so yet. So he said, can you come in and help me? So I went in, did an assessment, and kind of said, okay, well, what is it that you have? They were really actually mainly just property damage incidents
Okay.
that was costing them money. But
Yeah.
he also ran a company with, a lot of heavy equipment. So you have the potential for the incidents that are occurring not to be property damage. It could end up being a bodily injury or an environmental exceedance or something like that. So we really had to kind of like dig in and then do a lot of training. And you start there and make sure you kind of get everybody on the same page. But to build a culture, the trick to it is that management has to be involved, or the ownership. Because if you try and like say, I'm going to hand this down and we expect you to be safe, but they're not involved themselves, the employees will kind of see through it. And so the best way to build the culture is really for everybody to be involved. And if you truly and passionately care about people's safety, I call it actively caring, the employees know, they can feel it. So you can get pretty far with that, and then you start to get feedback. And then with the feedback you start getting, then you start figuring out, okay, what do we need to do to get the ball rolling, and you start to listen to what's coming in from your employees, whether it's in general industry or construction. It's kind of the same.
Gotcha. So do you set them up where they have their own training programs, or do you come in and train all their new workers? How does that work?
Yeah, sometimes I will do the training, or sometimes it might make sense for me to point them in a different direction. Because for my clients, what I'm trying to do is get them in a position where they can get people trained as fast as possible and as economically as possible. So sometimes it makes sense for me to go in and do the trainings. Sometimes it makes sense for me to help build them a customized training program. Like, for example, new hire onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of companies don't have any kind of, new hire onboarding program that describes what their expectations are for safety. And that's like a super basic thing that can be done right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
And that, so your employees, as you're bringing them in and you're ramping up, you can, they know what the expectations are. So there's no mysteries.
Yeah, it's got to be harder to change once you're already going in a direction, and to say, hey, wait, no, now safety is important, and really getting people to buy into that culture when it hasn't been that way.
Yeah, it is. It's very, the best way to deal with that sometimes is just to be transparent. And it's hard for some business owners or managers to do that because there's a lot of pride and there's ego involved. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's better to get up in front of 100 employees and say, look, I'll admit we didn't get it right, and we could be doing more, and this is why we're having the meeting, because moving forward we really want to make a difference in our safety program. And so usually by just doing that, I think the employees will respond better to that.
No, I agree. So, especially a business or any business, as you learn and you know better, then you do better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so like a lot of the clients that I deal with are subcontractors that they sign subcontracts that say they have a safety plan, but they don't. So if they came to you and said, I needed a safety plan, and how would that look like? Like, what would that look like if they came to you and said, I signed this contract, or I'm about to sign this contract that said I need this safety plan. What do I need to do?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially in construction. And if any of your clients or listeners are in environmental construction, the need for that safety plan is even higher than, like, let's say you just do tenant improvement kind of construction. And so one of the things that I do is I help my clients write their safety plans if they've never written one before. And so far, I think I've written about almost 600 safety
Really?
plans from different types of projects, going from just basic construction to one I'm working on right now is for a site that NASA used to have that has radiation.
Oh, yeah.
And so it gets pretty complex when you get into that because there's a lot of exposure issues and you have to come up with elaborate plans for how you're going to protect the workers. And sometimes you also have to take into consideration the area around the project site. Now, like in this case, and in some other projects I've done, you have sometimes you have residents that live
Mm.
there, so they're very concerned about the contaminants that are on site, the work that's being done, and they get freaked out that they could potentially be exposed just by the work that's going to be conducted. So there's a lot of facets to creating a safety plan the right way. And one of the ways I do it for some of my larger clients is I have I call it a HASP request, a health and safety plan request, and it's
Hmm.
just a link, and I can send them the link, and they fill out all the right questions, and then I can produce the safety plan based on that. But the plans usually include, everything from physical hazards to chemical hazards, or what we would call chemicals of concern, which would be the contamination, like if it's lead
Hmm.
or asbestos and those kinds of things, and then safety data sheets and all those things. So yeah, we put those together, but they can get pretty complex. In some cases, by the time I'm done with the safety plan, some of them are as big as 1,000 pages. So
Well, it sounds like you deal with like a lot of environmental issues. And I know you did one with lead impacted residents. How
yes,
did you deal with something? Tell me that story.
well, that was probably one of the trickiest projects I think I was ever involved in. And part of the reason was because the company had to ramp up and hire people from the union. And
Ah,
it was kind of like what I would call, this was a really high profile project in Los Angeles. And
gotcha.
the company that was sort of on the hook for this major cleanup was a company that a lot of people know about. It's called Xi Technologies. And Xi
Okay.
Technologies was one of the largest lead battery recycling companies in the United States. And it at their Vernon facility in Los Angeles,
Mhm.
uh, they had been there since the 30s, 40s, probably. And so a lot of their business practices back then weren't really sound, we'll say,
Yeah.
and they didn't meet a lot of the modern day environmental requirements. So they ended up kind of like being in the crosshairs of the regulatory agencies because when they would smelt the lead and melt it down into these giant ingots, there was we'll call it like an exhaust stack, and they were sort of blamed for uh, discharging exhaust dust that had lead in it, and
Ah,
the agencies were saying that it was blowing with the wind a radius of like 1.8 miles away from the facility into the residential areas. And
oh
in
wow.
these residential areas, you have a lot of homes that were built in the 20s and 30s, and we'll say it's not a high income area. We'll just put
Got
it like that. And there was a high um, ratio of lead poisoning in those particular areas. So the agencies, the California Department of Public Health, got involved, and they started investigating why are all these kids being exposed to lead. And when they
Oh,
started looking at it, I think the first place that they went was they started looking at that facility. And so some of the lead was discharged from the facility. Whether it really went 1.8 miles away is
uh-huh.
debatable. And so there's been a lot of stuff in the news about it, but it's a really complex project. And then when they came down to doing the cleanup side, that's where I got involved with the health and safety side of things and trying to ramp up with 100 new workers who've never done environmental work before, because it was a state project. We had to hire from the union. And so it really created a lot of challenges. And then you also have other, like the oversight agencies. You have here we have the South Coast Air Quality Management District that they regulate the air. Then you have the California Department of Public Health, the Department of Toxic Substance Control. So all of them were kind of like fighting each other because they wanted to be the main oversight agency. So it started to create a lot of issues, And so really the problem was dealing with the workforce and getting them trained up. It's kind
So
of
you have 100 guys that know nothing about environmental. And so what did they actually do? Did they go wash everything? What did they?
Okay, so and it was men and women that were involved in the project. And so they had the union people, but then the community said, hey, we want to hire people from within the community to help on this project. So they had this thing called the Works program. And the Works program, it was like any resident that wanted to sign up could do it. And I didn't really like that part of it because it really added another layer of challenge. But that it was a juicy contract. And if you want to work on these kinds of big money projects, sometimes you are forced to do things you don't want to do. And you are challenged at every turn, So the way the cleanup went down is, imagine a giant neighborhood of 10,000 homes, and all of them are supposedly impacted with lead contamination, and the levels are different for each home, right? So the state had to say, how are we going to prioritize the cleanup? And they went in and they started doing soil sampling out at the front yards and the backyards of each resident. And then based on the analytical results of those soil samples, they would say, okay, well, we're going to do this house first. We're going to do that house over there. And there was really no rhyme or reason to how they wanted it to be conducted. So the most efficient way to do it wasn't the way that it actually went down. But we would go in and take these mini excavators, excavate all the soil out of the backyard, excavate the soil out of the front yard, give them all new landscape. They would get to select from a pick list of the type of grass sod that they would like, And so we would lay it all out, water it, get it all set up, and the house is nice. Now, the downside to this that nobody talked about is that a lot of the homes still had lead-based paint on the outside and on the inside.
Because they're built in the 20s.
Because they were built in the 20s and 30s. So I called this a feel-good project, and it was really kind of flawed, in my opinion. But we were just there to do a specific task or a part of the project. We weren't there to, fix the whole problem. And
question why.
it was really profitable, but the other challenges were, you're dealing with the homes. The footprint of the homes was very narrow, so it didn't take long before we really started to have a lot of property damage incidents where people were running their these reach lifts. They're for moving the soil in these bags, right? So the reach lifts, they would bump the side of the house and crack a fence or something like that, and then the homeowner wants a brand new fence. So a couple people actually got injured, So it was a challenge, every day it was a challenge.
Well, you're training them on how to do their jobs. You're trying to teach them how to do safely. That sounds like you got union people, just people from the neighborhood. Sounds like a government project.
Yeah, it was a challenge because you have to make sure you're complying with OSHA, all the regulatory stuff, and then you're really looking out for the best interest of the employees so that they don't get hurt or get exposed and start breathing in, lead dust. So there was
Yeah,
a lot of
exactly.
challenges, but those are the projects where you really learn a lot about um, you know how to conduct a job, or how to you know a job might look good on paper, but then when you really go out to try and execute it, the challenges are far greater than anybody ever anticipated. So it tests everybody.
So tell me
So,
about some of the specific certifications that you teach and how they work.
okay, so some of the stuff that I teach a lot is about HAZCOM, which is the HAZCOM standard by OSHA, about the
Gotcha.
chemicals and how to use the SDS sheets, the safety data sheets, properly, and respiratory protection, and making sure that exposure hazards are managed properly. So I do that. I do the 40-hour OSHA HAZWOPER training for
Mm,
for workers or companies that want to do that, like get their whole crews set up.
gotcha.
And then I also do the 8-hour HAZWOPER refresher courses. So I do forklift certifications and just a lot of different stuff. But one of the main things I do, especially for a lot of clients, that's really not like a super well, it's high priority, but it's not really high on OSHA's list of things. Is I came up with a way to train workers on hazard recognition,
Okay.
and it could be used in any industry, general industry. It could be used at home. It could be used in construction. And the reason I wanted to put a lot of focus on that is because a lot of workers don't really understand the 10 different hazard classes and how to pinpoint the hazards within those hazard classes. And then once they recognize them, how to mitigate them so that they don't get hurt. Because my theory is the training is great, but what you really need to do is make sure that the worker understands how to identify the hazards for the
Gotcha.
type of work that they're doing. And paper and having a health and safety plan, that's just one aspect of it. But you really need to make sure that the workers are taking responsibility for their own safety as well. And the best way you can do that is to train them on how to recognize hazards. So I feel like
So
that is
you part
super
of that
beneficial.
program is you show them what the hazards look like.
Yeah, I call it a hazard hunt. And so we have a form for it. So, like, if you're a
Uh-huh.
new worker and you come out to our construction site, let's say, we want to like kind of challenge you, and that's a perfect way to get people oriented to what to look for. So we'll hand them the form and say, go out and start looking for hazards, and you basically follow the steps on the form. And it's pretty fun, actually, because you never know what you're going to find.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And some of the people, they kind of look at you, silly, but everybody finds different things. So, and then what we do
No, and
when
it's so much better.
yeah. So one of the other things, services that I provide for some of my local clients here, is I go out and do site inspections. And what I
Okay.
do is, I can do a date, like a weekly site inspection, and I record all the information on uh, it's like a software program where you can embed the pictures, and you can create a
Okay.
report right from the job site. But what I do is,
Really.
a lot of times I'll take the images, and I can use those for trainings. And we just did this Fallen Worker Memorial Day training. It was a webinar. It's actually
Hmm.
on our website. So what we did is we took a bunch of images and stuff from different job sites, and then we used that to kind of like show how to go look for the hazards and what, hazards really look like. So I have thousands and thousands of pictures, and I also do drone, footage and stuff. So I have plenty of content, and yeah, it's kind of comes in handy.
People want to see the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's people learn from that. It sounds silly, but when you go do a training, like I've stood up in front of people, like 300 people, and done safety trainings, and when you start to pull things up or show them images that are eye-catching, you really can make a difference, and it helps make the point, what to look for. And sometimes it's better than just getting up there and talking. I think that they like that better.
Oh, absolutely. So is there any company that's too small that shouldn't consider this? Like, I have a lot of residential contractors that, have just a small shop. What would safety look like? What could they do to, still make their job site safe?
Well, I think it's a good question. I don't think any company is too small if, because at some point in time, what happens is, even if that's not a huge company, when they start to feel the pain of, the losses, like I said earlier, the property damages, even theft or security incidents, which is huge. That kind of ties into safety too, because sometimes you're working in areas that aren't very great, and
Yeah.
I was at a site yesterday doing a site inspection for a new client, and one of the first things I did when I was out there is I was observing their crew and how conscientious they were with regard to where their truck and tools and equipment was parked. And once it started working inside this retail shopping center, did they keep the truck and equipment and tools in the line of sight? Did they leave it unattended and that kind of stuff? Because in some of these areas, if you just turn your head for a second, your tools and equipment are gone, and those are losses. Generators are stolen frequently, and any opportunity for somebody to come in and grab something off the back of a truck, and then there's another loss. It's not just the loss of the tool. You also have the loss because you have to go replace it. And then sometimes not having the tool on the job, the right tool, means that you have to go out and find it, and it might delay work. And if you have 5 workers standing around waiting for a generator, that's a loss because you're paying an hourly wage. So any way you can prevent a loss, that's what I'm here to do, is to try and help clients. And it doesn't really matter how big the clients are. Even if they want to call and pick my brain, I'm open to, just a phone call, because I really like helping people, figure out the best way to keep people safe and stay profitable,
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
Good. So if people wanted to find more about you, where would they go? Where would they find you?
My website would be the best way to track me down. So that's www.yellowknifesafety.com.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes too, so people can just scroll down and click on it. But I think, is there anything else that I forgot to mention that you think is important that we should talk about?
Well, I would say that it's important for your clients or listeners or people that's listening to the show to really think about being proactive with their incident investigations or reporting near misses. So let's say you have a company of 20 employees and you're a plumber, or you're trying to grow your business, but really trying to get the employees to report things that happened but maybe didn't result in a total loss, which would be, you're paying out money and that kind of thing, because you can investigate a near miss the same way you would investigate an incident. The only reason a near miss didn't turn into an incident is by luck. So
Yeah.
those are like golden nuggets. Capturing that information is like a golden nugget of information that could be really useful to you, because there's some statistics that the oil companies did way back, probably 15 years, 20 years ago. And they came up with this number, and people should remember this, that for every incident that happens, there was probably about 8 near misses that happened that were
Really?
similar in nature.
Wow.
So that means the problem is usually bigger than you realize. And so if you can focus on being proactive instead of waiting for something to happen and then reacting, you're way better off. And the trick to that is just making sure that your employees, they're kind of encouraged to promote the reporting. And if people are beat up because they report things, or and there's a lot of superintendents and business owners and things that are hotheads in the industry. So you get farther with sugar than you do with vinegar when it comes to safety programs. And if you yell at people or you belittle them, you're not really going to get the best results, I would say. So keep it positive. Make sure your employees and people know that you actively care about their well-being, and you can really move mountains if you have the right attitude, I think, as far as safety goes.
Well, safety should be number one, right? I've been involved in enough projects to know it doesn't take but once, and there's a serious loss.
Yeah, and there goes your profits.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. So thanks, Terry. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.